On the afternoon of departure from Barbados, the ship's radio kept repeating a short line like a soothing lullaby. Weather fair, all well. The weather was stable, everything fine. The sea was a deep blue, like a velvet sheet stretching to the horizon, white battalions of clouds lined neatly in the northwest, and the wind was just strong enough to make the star-spangled flag flutter lightly on the main mast. USS Cyclops, the largest supply ship of the U.S. Navy at that time, quietly split the waves. Its steel hull, longer than a football field and a half, slid forward with no groan, only an occasional crackle as dried sea salt flaked from the cables. In her belly lay heaps of raw manganese ore, the dense metal used for steelmaking in war, piled like little mountains, fastened with wooden beams and steel lashings. The ship sat deep in the water, heavy but measured. Deck officers checked the cargo lists, stability calculations were sound. The metacentric height was just sufficient for the expected calm voyage toward Baltimore. The crew of 309 spread across watches, their names chalked on a board near the radio room door. The youngest had barely left their teens, faces still fresh with the scent of soap. The oldest had long grown used to the salt of the sea more than the smoke of hearth. They talked about Baltimore, about a cold beer, about a dry-rented room, about half-written letters. In the engine room, pistons drummed with a steady bass, the heartbeat of an uneventful journey. The captain, rumored among the men for a mercurial temper, seemed unusually calm that day, standing before the compass needle that swayed gently like a tamed reed, tracing the straight line of the course on the chart. He nodded to the navigator. Hold the heading, maintain speed. But out there, in the layers of atmosphere to the northeast, something was changing. Not a named storm, nor a forecasted cyclone. Just pressure lines suddenly crowding together, like a nest of snakes coiling to strike. A low trough formed swiftly and spread, meeting humid air rising from the equator. From above, one would have seen the sea like a heated sheet of metal, its surface showing strange ripples, short-period waves, confused crests, shifting directions. None aboard Cyclops noticed. In their logbook, the page still read, "Southeast breeze, good visibility." The radio operator smiled, switching off the transmitter after sending the final line. "Weather fair, all well." The manganese ore lay silent in the holds, like an orchestra waiting for its conductor's cue. Ballast tanks had been adjusted before leaving Barbados to balance the ship. The axis was true, roll within limits. Yet the ore, though lashed, had its own will. The fist-sized jagged lumps, dry and rough, if dampened and shaken, could drift into corners, building small asymmetries invisible to the eye. A minor shift could, through thousands of oscillations, accumulate like sap seeping through wood. The cargo master made his rounds, hammering the bulkheads, listening to the hollow, solid thuds. He shrugged, hearing nothing unusual. On deck, sailors tilted caps, joked, and admired the glassy sky. Night fell quicker than expected. The sun sank like a coin into a cup, the last gleam flickering before vanishing. Stars sprang out, cold and distant. The wind veered, carrying a trace of rain. In the wheelhouse, the navigator lit another lamp. The radio operator, by habit, checked the antenna, tuned the frequency, rubbed the connectors clean. "We are in the middle of nowhere," he laughed, half joking. "Even a seagull's cry echoes like church bells." None knew these were the final minutes of peace, when every surface, bolt, and seam sat firmly in place, untested by the sudden storm swelling in the dark. On the horizon, a strip of lightning blinked, thunderless, like the sky winking. Then came a low rumble, as if voices spoke underground. An unnameable unease stirred. The captain ordered a slight reduction in speed, not out of fear but experience. Waves thickened, slamming the hull in heavy rhythms like coarse hands. On deck, the flag halyard quivered, its faint whine reminding one of old sea tales. The sea can be a mother or a thief. In the hold, a single oar lump rolled, clattering, then stopped. The ship still held course. Engines throbbed steady. No further "all well" was sent. Calm, the kind that precedes storms, thickened into something tangible, like damp cloth draped over everything. The first blast struck the starboard after midnight. It came not as a long howl described in books, but as a dry jolt that rattled cups in the mess and tilted the compass card. "Steady!" the helmsman barked. Swells piled high, sweeping white foam over the forecastle. Deckhands rushed to secure loose fittings. Wind lashed sideways, salty and cold. Stinging eyes. Clouds thickened into a solid wall, pressing closer. Within minutes, visibility collapsed, as if someone had blown out a lamp. Rain and spray merged into endless gray. In the holds, lashings strained. Oar, once still, began sliding in tiny jerks with each roll. In hold number 3, a mound tilted slightly. Inertia tugged it half a foot starboard. No one saw. All that could be heard was a low metallic growl, like a beast breathing. The cargo master tapped the walls again. Different resonance, but he blamed it on waves striking the steel. In the engine room, steam pressure rose to maintain speed against headwinds. The machine roared louder, as if climbing an invisible hill. The second blast hit harder, with a lightning bolt spearing across the sky. Cyclops rolled deeper, then staggered upright. Men fell against bulkheads. The captain shouted, 2 degrees port! Reduce 1 knot! The wheel turned. The hull strained. But seas had shifted, striking crosswise at bow and starboard, like a thinking adversary. Below, oar shifted again. Smaller lumps wedged between larger ones, funneling weight to one side, like sand finding a hollow. What had been a few tons of imbalance grew to dozens. Stability curves would have shown decline if anyone had measured. The radio operator tried catching a weather report, but static shrieked across the band, storm-charged ions choking the air. He retuned, swapped antennas, checked the transmitter. It worked, but lightning had fouled the sky. "We can still send, sir," he reported, "but no guarantee anyone will hear." The captain nodded, eyes fixed on a wall of water rising like a dragon's spine. "Prepare to meet it!" The wave crashed, burying the bow in liquid concrete. For a moment, tons of water clung before draining, adding to the oar's lean. Cyclops groaned, one lash snapping. In hold number 3, an entire heap slid half a meter. That shift, with ore as heavy as manganese, was brutal. Center of mass moved, roll inertia altered, oscillations widened. Each roll now exceeded the last, dislodging more ore, cascading like a black stonefall. "Ballast! Port tanks!" an officer yelled. Valves opened, water pumped, but ballast could not keep pace with tons of shifting solid rock. Lightning struck nearby, antenna trembling until a sharp crack signaled its partial break. The operator paled. The secondary mast dangled uselessly. "We still have the reserve antenna," he muttered, strapping himself down, "but range is short." The clock ticked past 1:01 a.m. On deck, a young sailor slipped, barely saved. His wide eyes saw the sea as a bottomless socket. "Never seen waves cross like this?" he gasped. "Nobody has," his mate answered. This was no neat cyclone with a calm eye, but chaotic interference of 2 pressure systems, delivering illogical blows. Bow, beam, stern in turn. Each slam rearranged oar, turning a balanced cargo into lopsided blocks. The ship rolled longer, like an overweight dancer stumbling. "Lighten forward deck load," someone shouted. "There is no deck cargo," came the grim reply. All remedies stripped away. The cargo was buried, unreachable. Then a pause, winds eased, seas lowered. "Weather window," the captain whispered. "Send it now." The operator keyed furiously, but the window lasted seconds. Another squall hit starboard, squeezing the hull like a tin box. Cyclops lurched farther than ever. In the hold, ore avalanched, thousands of tons lunging sideways. Steel shrieked, beams bent. Water swept starboard deck, adding leverage. This time, when the hull tried to right itself, elasticity was gone. Roll angle too deep. Furniture toppled. Sailors clung to anything fixed. "Send SOS!" the captain roared. The operator slammed keys, hands shaking. Morse dots and dashes burst amid static, lightning, and violent rolls. Perhaps sparks of signal escaped, swallowed by noise, drowned by rain, silenced by the broken antenna. No one knows. At that same instant, a rogue wave, a freak cross-sea giant, lifted the bow, then dropped it into a trough. The sound was not a crash, but a bending groan, as if the whole hull twisted. Water forced through seams, bolts screamed. A sailor vanished into foam. Someone cried out, voice torn away. When geometry of balance breaks, human decisions shrink smaller than blades of wind. With manganese ore heavy as lead in her belly, Cyclops fell into a vicious loop. List caused ore to shift, shifted ore worsened list. Ballast pumps lagged, helm orders futile. Radio, the only throat to the world. Hoarse with static, broken antenna, drowned circuits. The operator still fought. SOS. SOS. Each S, each O dropping into nothing. On deck, men hurled life rings, shouted names, names shredded, rings swallowed. Rain poured like a curtain, wind lashed, waves hammered, and beneath all was the dead weight of cargo stealing the ship's righting arm. It may have been minutes, or less than one, between the last rogue wave and the end. Survivors, if any, had no time nor means to tell. The hull plunged fast, bow down, stern heaved above two black ridges, then arrowed into the deep. Manganese, dense and dark, dragged everything like a giant anchor. No oil slick, tanks were crushed before they could leak. No debris, most dragged under, remnants shredded. No floating objects. Stormy sea returned nothing. A ship over 160 meters, pride of the supply fleet, erased like ink soaked into blotting paper, without a scream long enough to reach land. And so remains the century-old riddle. Why no distress signal? The answer may lie in tiny, cruel coincidences. An antenna snapping during the narrowest transmission window. Storm-charged ionosphere silencing the sky. A sudden heel throwing the operator off his chair, cutting the ground line. Water-shorting circuits. Above all, the speed, faster than any procedure could unfold. One imagines the SOS lamp blinking, but truth might have been simpler. A hand clutching a table edge, a Morse burst choked in static, a shout, "Sent already!" unheard, and silence after. By dawn, skies cleared as if anger spent. Passing ships found nothing but tidy sea, smooth as though no footprints existed. In Baltimore, post offices quiet, no letters arrived. At naval stations, no one knocked with news. On land, over 300 families stared at framed black and white portraits, whispering to the sea. The sea replied only with distant rumble, memory not meant for man. Newspapers dubbed it Mystery of the Ocean, but sailors knew. Some nights, storms arrived nameless, through a jagged line on a barometer, a slight shift in a hold, crossing winds, a sudden heel beyond threshold, without warning. The sudden storm hypothesis offers no romantic tale. It is the cold logic of gravity and chaos. Heavy manganese destabilized as storms struck irregularly, radios silenced by lightning, static, breakage. Catastrophe struck faster than a message could flee the night. If one still asks why no SOS, perhaps the answer is that it was sent. But wind, rain, lightning, and the weight of the moment pressed it down, as the black oar pressed the ship into the deep. The sea kept the story, as always, speaking in thunder, erasing with calm, leaving mankind with logical fragments, battered together into a chilling but plausible truth. A sudden storm, shifting cargo, and in the fracture of a moment, every "all well" became a distant echo, extinguished before reaching any listening ear. The year was 1918, the high tide of the First World War. Across the Atlantic, invisible hunters prowled beneath the waves. German U-boats, the Kaiser's iron wolves, whose torpedoes had already sent hundreds of merchant and naval vessels to the seabed. To the sailors of the United States and the Allies, every voyage across the ocean was a gamble with death. Newsprint carried grim headlines of ships vanishing in flashes of fire. And posters in New York and London urged vigilance. Beware the submarine menace. Into this ocean of fear, sailed the USS Cyclops, not a warship, but the largest collier in the U.S. Navy, carrying thousands of tons of manganese ore, critical for steel production in the war effort. She had left Rio de Janeiro, stopped at Barbados, and was bound for Baltimore. On paper, the journey was routine. Her holds brimmed with black ore, her crew of 309 worked through their shifts, and her captain checked the charts with disciplined precision. The final radio message, "Weather fair, all well," suggested nothing amiss. Yet, in the tense atmosphere of 1918, danger did not always show itself in storms or lightning. It could lurk unseen, periscope barely breaking the surface, calculating an intercept path. For many historians and naval analysts, the disappearance of Cyclops raises a chilling possibility. Was she the victim of a German U-boat attack? The theory had logic. U-boats were at their peak in 1918, spreading terror even along the American coastline. Convoys had become essential precisely because solitary ships were easy prey. The Cyclops traveled alone, enormous, slow-moving, and deeply laden, a perfect target. Her loss, with no distress signal and no debris, fits eerily with the pattern of torpedo strikes, where a single detonation could cause catastrophic flooding. And unlike storms, the submarine menace had a name, a commander, and a mission: to cripple the Allied supply lines. But here the mystery grows sharper. Normally, when a ship was torpedoed, at least some evidence lingered. Survivors might be plucked from the sea, wreckage might wash ashore, oil slicks might stretch across the waves. In the case of Cyclops, nothing surfaced. 309 souls vanished as though swallowed whole. German U-boat records, captured and declassified after the war, showed no entry for a strike against Cyclops. No commander claimed credit. The meticulous German naval logs, which tallied sinkings with cold efficiency, made no mention of her. This absence is puzzling. If a U-boat had sunk the largest collier in the U.S. Navy, carrying vital war material, why would the Germans not trumpet the victory? Propaganda was a weapon too, and the Kaiser's navy rarely missed a chance to boast of successful kills, unless, some speculate, the strike had been unauthorized, or records lost, or a commander silenced. Or perhaps the truth was darker still, that Cyclops was caught by a submarine attack so sudden, so annihilating, that neither side left a trace. To imagine the U-boat theory, one must descend into the claustrophobic steel tubes of Germany's undersea fleet. A type U-boat, bristling with torpedoes, could linger beneath the surface for days, creeping into position like a predator. Periscope sweeps scanned for silhouettes against the horizon, fat freighters, tankers, and colliers. When spotted, calculations began: range, speed, angle on the bow. A pencil traced numbers on a chart, aligning the target's predictable path with the U-boat's hidden teeth. Picture then the bulk of Cyclops moving northward, her great hull heavy with manganese, her smokestack smudging the dawn sky. To a submarine commander, she would have looked irresistible, too big to miss, too valuable to ignore. A torpedo, properly placed, could shatter her spine. If two were fired, one at the bow, one amidships, her fate would be sealed. Within minutes, she could roll and vanish, her cargo dragging her downward before SOS flares could even be launched. A U-boat could then slip away, leaving only ripples and silence. Such strikes had precedent. The British liner Lusitania, though larger, had sunk in less than 20 minutes after a single torpedo in 1915. Countless merchantmen were dispatched even faster. With Cyclops loaded down, her stability compromised by ore, it is conceivable that a torpedo hit could have dragged her under before distress signals were sent. Men at the wireless might not have had time to transmit. In the chaos of explosions, flooding, and darkness, survival rafts could have been swept away, leaving nothing for patrols to find days later. Still, skepticism lingers. The Caribbean, where Cyclops vanished, was not a known hunting ground for U-boats. German submarines primarily prowled the North Atlantic and European waters, where convoys clustered. To reach so far south would require daring and logistical support. Could a U-boat have lurked near Barbados, lying in wait? Some researchers suggest it was unlikely, though not impossible. War records show a few German subs ventured far afield, testing Allied defenses. If one had stalked Cyclops, it would have been a feat of reach and ambition. Then comes the silence of the German archives. After the armistice, Allied investigators pored over captured U-boat logs. Every confirmed sinking was catalogued. Nowhere did the name Cyclops appear. Some theorists argue that the record may have been lost, destroyed, or deliberately concealed. Others believe the Germans may never have realized which ship they struck. Perhaps a commander noted a large freighter destroyed without identifying her as the Navy's prized collier. In war, confusion was common and exact identifications rare. Yet there is a counterpoint. The Germans loved to boast. A confirmed sinking of such magnitude would have been propaganda gold. The silence is almost too complete. It hints not at concealment, but at absence. Maybe there truly was no U-boat, no torpedo, no hunter in the dark. And yet, for families who could not fathom how a ship simply disappeared, the submarine theory at least gave form to the nightmare. Better a visible enemy than the faceless void. The U-boat hypothesis remains one of the most tantalizing explanations for the loss of USS Cyclops. It matches the era, the menace, and the psychology of fear in 1918. A slow-moving collier, heavy with war material, vanishes without a word. What else but a submarine ambush? And yet, the evidence is as thin as mist. No wreckage, no survivors, no German record, no Allied confirmation. It is a ghost theory, compelling in imagination, elusive in fact. If a torpedo had struck, why no oil slick, no drifting timber, no lifeboats? Even in sudden sinkings, the sea often coughs up scraps. If a U-boat commander had triumphed, why not claim the glory? Was there a cover-up, perhaps to avoid revealing U-boat range capabilities? Or had the ship been mistaken for another? Each possibility frays under scrutiny. Still, the idea refuses to die. Historians revisit it, novelists seize it, conspiracy theorists breathe life into it. In the great catalogue of maritime mysteries, submarine attack is the explanation that feels most human. It frames the tragedy not as blind chance or supernatural doom, but as the act of men against men, war against war. It makes sense in a way storms and myths do not. And yet, more than a century later, no proof lies on the seabed to confirm it. The Cyclops is still missing, her final chapter unwritten. Perhaps someday sonar will reveal her bones in the deep, twisted by explosion, or perhaps she rests whole, folded gently by time and pressure. Until then, the U-boat theory remains a shadow story, plausible, chilling, but unproven. It reminds us of an age when every horizon hid an enemy, when the ocean itself was a battlefield, and when 309 lives could vanish in silence, leaving behind only the echo of an unanswered question. Did a German submarine take her down, or did the sea claim her for itself? The USS Cyclops sailed not only with thousands of tons of manganese ore, but also with whispered stories about her captain, George Worley. In official reports, Worley was an experienced officer, bound to the sea since his youth. Yet, in the shadowed corners of the crew quarters, where whispers traveled faster than the thrum of engines, sailors murmured that he was a man of volatile temperament, quick to anger and sometimes difficult to read. Some said he was authoritarian, cold toward his men. Others claimed he often seemed withdrawn, lonely, as if burdened by a private secret. The Cyclops' crew was not made up entirely of hardened veterans. They were a mix of naval officers, dock workers, and newly recruited young men. Such diversity under a skilled leader might have become a source of strength. But under Worley's command, it sometimes smoldered as hidden tinder. Some sailors recounted that he would shout over trivial mistakes, a slack anchor line, a hold not sealed on schedule. A watch changed a few minutes late. Each outburst accumulated into resentment, and resentment could, in time, become mutiny. On certain nights, in the dim bunks, young sailors would whisper, "If one day he goes mad, what will we do?" At first, these words sounded like jokes, but gradually, in the tense atmosphere of a long wartime voyage, they grew into an unsettling hypothesis. If so many ships had perished to storms and torpedoes, might one not perish to the men aboard? And if Cyclops disappeared, could it have been the result of an internal incident? A mutiny flaring in the dark? This theory arose from a paradox. No wreckage, no SOS, no debris. If not nature, if not an external enemy, perhaps the seeds of disaster sprouted within the ship herself. Some believed Worley, in anger, may have issued reckless orders, changed course, or provoked such discontent that sailors rose against him. A mere deviation of course might have pushed the ship into dangerous seas or far from patrol routes where rescue could have been possible. What makes this hypothesis compelling is its human element. In storms, we find reasons in nature. In war, we blame the enemy. But in an internal crisis, the perpetrators are the very souls bound together aboard. And if indeed a mutiny took place on Cyclops, then the century of silence may be nothing more than a shroud over secrets buried deep with the ocean floor. Naval history is full of cases where human factors led ships to ruin. Mutinies, internal disputes, moments of loss of control, these often ended in tragedy. Sailors recall the Bounty, where Fletcher Christian defied Captain Bligh. They recall warships seized by desperate crews. Thus, when Cyclops vanished, many placed her within that lineage. A plausible theory, even absent evidence. Rumors held that Worley was not only hot-tempered, but eccentric. Some who had served under him said he kept to his own habits, rarely confiding, sometimes issuing strange orders without explanation. In the tense context of war, such eccentricities could be magnified, becoming fodder for rumor. He may have led the ship astray, a journalist of the era speculated, and the crew in panic may have risen up against him. But if a mutiny had truly occurred, why were there no survivors to tell the tale? Why was no lifeboat found? One subtheory suggested that, if an incident did erupt, it could have unleashed a swift chain of calamities, violent clashes, chaos, and loss of control, the ship already heavily burdened and unstable. A few minutes of disorder might have sufficed for a fatal mistake, an incorrect course change, or an accident in the already strained cargo holds. Documents note that the route from Barbados to Baltimore posed no special hazards. But what if Cyclops never followed the intended course? A ship so large, diverted into less traveled waters, would have had fewer chances of detection. If an internal conflict had spurred such a mistake, the vessel might have strayed from patrol lanes and slipped beyond the reach of any help. The silence of German naval reports and the absence of any SOS, ironically, lend weight to this. No external foe, only internal fracture. Still, all of this remains speculation. No concrete evidence ever emerged. No recovered logbook hinted at unrest. No last letters betrayed unease. What remains are only vague fragments, an unpredictable captain, a diverse crew, and a voyage swallowed in silence. Perhaps that silence itself is the sole trace of an internal incident, never brought to light. If the theory of mutiny or internal breakdown is true, then it marks a tragedy sadder than storm or torpedo, the tragedy of man against man. Not sacrifice before nature's fury or an enemy's strike, but collapse from within, at the heart of a crew that should have been united to survive the ocean. In that case, the deaths of 309 souls were not only a material loss, but a spiritual wound, the ship becoming a grave for secrets unspoken. The problem is, no evidence has ever surfaced. It all rests on rumors, sensational headlines, and stories embroidered through decades. Historians, after more than a century, have found nothing to prove Cyclops changed course, or that Worley truly lost control. This makes the hypothesis both haunting and fragile. It has the allure of human drama, but lacks the foundation to stand as historical fact. And so, after more than 100 years, Cyclops lives only in memory as one of history's most mysterious vanishings. If an internal crisis did happen, it sank with the ship, leaving no trace. If not, then all whispers about Captain Worley and crew unrest are nothing but shadows, deepening the legend of the Bermuda Triangle and humanity's unease before the inexplicable. Perhaps, as with so many other secrets, the truth of Cyclops will remain forever in the deep, where no light can reach. When the USS Cyclops disappeared in 1918, no explanation could soothe the anxiety of the American public. For months, the families of 309 sailors waited for news, while newspapers raced to propose theories. Among them was one that defied reason. The ship had vanished on the edge of a legendary region, the Bermuda Triangle. People began to whisper, perhaps Cyclops had not sunk in a storm, nor been hit by a torpedo, but had been swallowed by a supernatural phenomenon, a hidden gateway beneath the sea, where space and time twisted upon themselves. The Bermuda Triangle, drawn by connecting 3 points, Miami, Florida, Bermuda, and Puerto Rico, had long been linked to tales of strange disappearances. Sailors of the 19th century told of ships evaporating, compasses spinning madly, skies turning black without warning. By the 20th century, as aircraft became common, more stories surfaced of planes vanishing without leaving wreckage. Thus, when Cyclops went missing near those waters, coincidence quickly became association with the dreaded name Bermuda Triangle. In tabloid papers, writers painted imagined scenes, Cyclops sailing peacefully until the sky suddenly flashed with eerie blue light, a towering waterspout rising from the sea to engulf the hull. Contemporary authors compared it to a gateway to another world. Some even claimed the ship had not sunk at all, but had strayed into a parallel dimension where other lost vessels drifted still, trapped forever in an invisible whirlpool. Though these depictions were fanciful, they touched a primal human fear, the fear of vanishing without a trace. Humanity often explains the unseen with the supernatural, because nature, no matter how violent, leaves evidence. A storm scatters debris, an explosion spills oil. But absolute silence, why, the sea smooth as if no ship had passed, resembled a reminder. There might be a force mankind has never understood. Thus, the hidden gateway theory became one of the supernatural tales tied to USS Cyclops. It breathed life into the Bermuda Triangle legend, turning that region into a symbol of the unknowable. And for many, it was more alluring than practical theories, because it opened not only a story of accident, but the possibility of an entire mysterious world concealed beneath the deep waters. The supernatural hypothesis gained weight when people began linking the fate of Cyclops with other vanishings in the same region. More than 2 decades later, in 1945, Flight 19, a squadron of 5 Navy bombers, took off from Florida and vanished without a trace. The pilots reported compasses spinning, skies filled with strange haze, and then their signals ceased. The rescue plane dispatched to find them also disappeared, never recovered. The incident shocked the world, and once again, the name Bermuda Triangle echoed with dread. As journalists and writers looked backward, they discovered that Cyclops had been one of the earliest victims of this area. Tales of colliers, cargo ships, and yachts vanishing were collected, painted into a vast mural of a deadly sea zone. In that mural, Cyclops was the most striking piece, the largest vessel, the most lives lost, and gone without a trace. Some paranormal researchers argued that the Bermuda Triangle hosted magnetic anomalies. They cited reports of compasses spinning, radio interference, and even suggested that the area contained currents of space that could sweep a ship into another dimension. Others connected it with Atlantis, the mythical civilization buried beneath the ocean, whose mysterious technology might create gateways that consumed vessels. In novels and films, the image grew darker. Cyclops reimagined as a ghost ship, drifting in endless dimensions where no sun rises, compasses fail, and time itself freezes. Hundreds of sailor souls caught in an eternal loop, unable ever to return. Of course, scientists countered. They pointed out that there was no evidence the Bermuda Triangle was any more dangerous than other busy sea lanes. But facts and statistics could not overshadow the power of a supernatural story retold from person to person. For people of that era, when storms or torpedoes could not explain the disappearance of Cyclops, The idea of a hidden gateway provided a more persuasive explanation. At least it accounted for the completeness of silence. Today, more than a century later, the supernatural theory is still as alive as ever. Whenever the Bermuda Triangle is mentioned, Cyclops is remembered as one of its most emblematic mysteries. It was not merely a wartime disappearance, but elevated into legend of a hidden gateway that could devour both steel giants and human souls. Yet, like every supernatural hypothesis, it lacks evidence. No wreckage has ever been found, no signal recovered, no proof of another world beneath the ocean. It survives only in belief, fear, and the irresistible appeal of the unexplained. Perhaps it is precisely the absence of evidence that has allowed this theory to endure so long. If one day Cyclops were discovered lying intact on the Caribbean seabed, rusted and broken by pressure, the legend would collapse. But as long as the ocean keeps its secret, the supernatural tale will be retold, woven into collective imagination. For many, Cyclops did not sink in a storm or explosion. She stepped through a doorway we have never opened and perhaps should not. In this way, she became one of the greatest symbols of the Bermuda Triangle, an unanswered mystery where reality and myth merge, leaving behind more questions than answers. When the USS Cyclops departed Barbados in early March 1918, no one imagined it would be the last time the ship was ever seen. And when the truth became clear, that the vessel had disappeared entirely, with no wreckage and no distress signal, the U.S. Navy was forced to confront one of the greatest shocks in its history. 309 people, along with a ship over 160 meters long, had slipped into oblivion. The event was quickly recorded as the single largest loss in the history of the U.S. Navy. Before that, many ships had been sunk in war or in storms, but rarely had such a massive vessel, far from direct battle zones, vanished without leaving a trace. The number 309 was not only a tally of sailors and officers, but also a measure of grief for hundreds of families scattered across the United States. Young wives waited for husbands, children longed for their fathers' letters, aging parents prayed for their sons. All they received in return was the cold silence of the ocean. In the context of World War I, America had grown accustomed to loss. But loss usually had an identifiable cause: a battle, a torpedo, a violent storm. Cyclops, however, was a case of absolute mystery. That absoluteness made the incident a wound that could not heal. The Navy immediately launched searches, but found nothing but vast blue water. Later investigations uncovered no real clues. In the eyes of the public, Cyclops became more than a ship. It became a symbol of fragility before the sea. Newspapers printed photos of weeping families, bold headlines declaring, "Mystery of the Ocean, the ghost ship of the U.S. Navy." What began as a disappearance transformed into a collective trauma, a scar not only on the military, but also on the spirit of a nation. From 1918 to the present, countless investigations have been carried out. The U.S. Navy, historians, and independent researchers all sought to follow the trail of Cyclops. Yet no matter how advanced technology became, from sonar to satellites, the results remained the same. Nothing, no coordinates of a wreck, no floating debris, no conclusive explanation. For over 100 years, theories have been proposed and then discarded. Sudden storms, German submarines, internal strife, even supernatural speculation about the Bermuda Triangle. But each theory only explained part of the puzzle. None could answer the central questions. Why was there no SOS? Why no oil slick, no lifeboats, no single piece of wood washing ashore? This inability to solve the mystery elevated Cyclops into one of the greatest maritime enigmas of the century. It is cited in naval textbooks as an example of unforeseeable risk. It is featured in books about the Bermuda Triangle, a keystone in the chain of strange disappearances. It appears on television, in documentaries, and in articles as an open-ended question no one has resolved. For the families of the crew, the pain never ended. Without wreckage, remains, or a proper funeral, the waiting stretched endlessly. Some held hope until their last days that their loved ones were still alive, lost somewhere unknown. Others turned to religion, believing their kin had been taken into God's care in another world. Meanwhile, scientists could only concede. Sometimes the ocean swallows all evidence, leaving behind a void no one can fill. Over the past century, every new search technology has rekindled hope. But to this day, the Caribbean seabed has revealed nothing. The disappearance of Cyclops remains unanswered, and this enduring silence has only deepened its legendary status. Today, the USS Cyclops is remembered not just as a historical tragedy, but as an essential part of the Bermuda Triangle legend. When that mysterious region is mentioned, Cyclops is cited as one of its most striking examples. A massive vessel, a large crew, vanishing without a trace. The legacy of Cyclops lives on in many dimensions. For the U.S. Navy, it is a reminder of the vulnerability of both technology and human life before the ocean's power. For researchers, it remains an unsolved riddle. And for the public, it is a legend, passed down across generations as proof of the Bermuda Triangle's enduring enigma. If one day the wreck of Cyclops is discovered, perhaps many mysteries will be resolved. But such a discovery might also strip away the aura that has made Cyclops iconic. It is precisely the absence of answers that has allowed this story to endure, turning it into cultural heritage rather than merely historical fact. It is etched into collective memory as a sign that some things humanity cannot yet understand, and perhaps never should. And so, more than a century after her disappearance, Cyclops continues her voyage, not across the ocean, but within human imagination. She sails in books, in documentaries, in stories told around dinner tables, where the sea always stands as a metaphor for infinity. Perhaps this is her greatest legacy, not just a vanished ship, but an immortal legend, reminding us of the limits of human knowledge before the endless sea.